First of all, I would like to thank to Susan Niemann in particular for this opportunity to participate in this seminar, in this encounter.
Pull the mic a little closer.
And in particular for this occasion to discuss with you, despite my English, about the relationships between the ideals of Enlightenment on the one hand and cultural and political debates, particularly in Latin America on the other. Regarding that topic, I want to discuss a problem central to academic and political debates in Latin America today. This issue is the spread of multiculturalism, decolonization theory, and the replacement of reason with discourse practices. Those ideas risk, in my view, undermining the foundation of a democratic culture. In academic ambit, for example, multiculturalism and decolonization idea have influenced disciplines such as law, promoting point of view that run the risk of deteriorating a culture of human rights. As you may know, while human rights are universal, multiculturalism and decolonization often focus on particular perspectives. In some political circles, in turn, ideas that differ from the liberal democratic ideal are being promoted. Examples come from the left wing, include Bolivarian democracy in Venezuela, democracia bolivariana, the indigenous political system in Bolivia, and, as seen in Chile, politics oriented toward identity. But the similar phenomenon exists in Salvador or Honduras, where today is promoting authoritarian regime. This point of view, as I said, weaken the foundational ideals of democracy, making it essential to confront them. In this effort, the Kantian perspective is indispensable, in my view. My thesis, in other words, can be resumed in this way. The liberal democracy and human rights are founded on ideals of Enlightenment and on the possibility of sustaining universalist propositions in the social life. Multiculturalism and decolonization theory undermine these ideas and, in this measure, undermine the democratic ideal. To explain this, I will divide my speech in three parts. First, I will give an overview of cultural relativism, the colonial theory, and how reason is being deteriorated. Next, I will examine how Kant philosophy can help fight against these ideas and prevent some of their main negative effects, like the decline of democracy, dialogue, and human rights. Finally, I will present the main conclusions. Let me begin by discussing the key aspect of multiculturalism, decolonialism, and the distrust in reason. For explaining what I understand by multiculturalism, I would like to distinguish two versions of it: de facto multiculturalism and de jure multiculturalism. The former affirms a fact, the fact of the existence of diverse cultures with different values. It is a sociological or anthropological truth. The latter sustains a normative point, the idea that culture is the source of validity and truth of our belief. While the former is an empirical observation, the latter is moral claim. However, in the contemporary debate, both different levels are confused. it is easy to see the mistake when you transit from the first to the second. Just because a culture affirms some point of view about the relation of gender, for example, doesn't mean that this point of view is correct. However, in public discussion today, people often jump quickly from one idea to another. In this shift, people forget that from the simple existence of a culture, it is not possible to derive the validity of its norms. In other words, cultural diversity should not lead to relativism. The existence of diverse cultures cannot mean that there are no moral standards with universal validity. Some light interpretations, Michel Foucault work, or Richard Rorty in philosophical ambit, for example, make this mistake, in my view. As you remember, Foucault says that our opinions are shaped by ways of thinking and prejudices that come from our culture. This culture is built on power relationship known as micropower. But although power and interest affect our debate, they do not define them completely. If they did, Foucault's discourse would be meaningless, because how could he talk critically if he is trapped by the circumstances? If they did, then rationality would be an illusion, just a cover for our social relation. In this case, discourse would only reflect our own situation, and we would conclude that fairness and universality are just impossible dreams. In summary, according to that version of multiculturalism, the ideals of Enlightenment would be simple ideologies of domination. The consequence of that vision of multiculturalism is that the exercise of rational dialogue disappears and is transformed in an exercise of third-person statement that neither affirm nor denies the truth they have arrived at. The ideal of the public sphere, central to Enlightenment ideals, involves taking a distance, stepping back from your current situation to evaluate with general principles. While the market is just about preferences and their aggregation, the public sphere is about deliberation, where everyone can participate equally. Notwithstanding, this concept of the public sphere is an ideal in the Weberian sense, in the sense of Max Weber. It remains a transcendental idea and horizon of our efforts. Now, let me examine a theoretical consequence of the above, what is the decolonialist theory. Decolonization theory argues that European colonization not only led to political and economic exploitation, but also established dominance in knowledge and worldview favoring European perspective over indigenous or natives one. In addition to the cultural and political, there would be an epistemic domination. Even after gaining political independence, many societies would have not escaped this epistemic hegemony. The theory suggests that rationality is not universal, but culturally contingent. Allow me to give you an example. Boaventura de Sousa Santos, a key colonial thinker, advocates for a legal pluralism in Latin American debate, of course. This is a set of justice and legal systems that go beyond of egalitarian principles in relevant aspects of social life. According to him, law systems should express ethnic identity instead of equal citizenship. In similar sense, the principles of degrowth has been argued, claiming that economic development is opposite to local culture, for example, in the constitutional debate in Chile. These ideas have had influence, for example, in the constitutional process which Chile was embarking on 2 years ago. The point of view undermines and weakens the culture of human rights, in my view. It is not just because some argue that the culture of human rights is Eurocentric, liberal, and part of the epistemic domination we experience. This perspective also assumes that we cannot make universally valid moral or legal assertion. In other words, denies the existence of reasons that apply to everyone. If decolonialism assertions are correct, then our moral and political concepts, including human rights, are contingent. They would depend on the historical or cultural context from which they emerge, and thus cannot claim universal validity. Consequently, the principles on which human rights are founded would be seen as relative to a particular culture. Another culture that rejects these rights could argue that penalizing them for violation is merely imposing a dominant epistemic viewpoint, for example, under the guise of law. Judges, lawyers, and politicians who enforce or advocate for these rights, even if unaware, would merely be agent of this form of domination. These ideas pose, in my view, a significant danger to public debate. Advocates of these views believe that below the surface of a reasoning lies an unconscious factor such as epistemic domination or identity that represent the true motivation behind the argument. As a result, public debate are seen not as real argument about law or politics, but as shows that hide power struggles and personal interest. In this situation, human rights could quickly be pushed aside because they relied on the opposite idea. The reason, moral or legal, act as a limit to power and personal interest. This idea conflicts with those promoted by decolonialism and identity politics. In other words, the ideas of multiculturalism and decolonialism, these ideas, multiculturalism or decolonialism, contribute to what Georgi Lukács, do you remember? Georgi Lukács called an assault on reason. Assault on reason. Traditionally, reason was seen as a tool for understanding fact, achieving consensus, and guiding behavior through theoretical reasoning and open dialogue. However, today there is a belief that reason is one of many ways to interpret reality, and the dialogue a competence between interpretation or conflict between identities. It is argued that reason is often influenced by hidden agendas such as class or gender interest, leading to skepticism about the objectivity of reason. This skepticism turns public discourse into a strategic game where groups try to impose their perspectives. Yet, the text points out the contradiction in this view, claiming the reason is always prejudice, would itself be prejudice, of course. While reason can be influenced by outside interest, the ideal of rationality, it is ability to recognize and overcome these biases, a goal shared by thinkers from Marx to Habermas and liberals. However, today we tend to believe that reason does not exist and that we are a jumble of interests and identities that we defend with cunning rather than the sharpness of a good argument. And all this, of course, is reinforced by a certain conception of language that denies the function it fulfills in human society. Traditionally, and as far as modern philosophy is concerned, language is the public experience par excellence, the place where people meet. All contemporary philosophy, what the text called the linguistics term, comes from there. All authors, from Frege, Gottlob Frege, to Appel or Habermas, second Wittgenstein, have seen language as a place of human traffic through which we communicate knowledge and manage to discover what is correct in each case. But it now turns out that language is not that, but rather that language is a way of relating multiple identities to one another, each of which establishes an invisible boundary. Or like Stanley Fitch, do you know? American professor? Yeah. Stanley Fitch.
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Fish, yeah.
Fitch, or like Stanley Fitch sustained, it doesn't exist languages, but there exist communities of interpretations. There is no text, there are only readers. A language conceived in this way runs the risk of isolating people, reinforcing the idea they have of themselves rather than inviting them to correct in exchange with others. What aspect of the Kantian philosophy allow us to face that ideas? Let me to indicate three aspects. The double character of the Kantian critique, the possibility of universal claims in middle of diversity and plurality, and the ideal of autonomy. Contrary to popular belief, Kant's conception of reason is not unilateral. Kant affirmed and examined both the potential of reason and its limits. The famous metaphor of the island of truth illustrates this well. Reason is surrounded by an ocean of ideas which depend on our experiences and circumstances. The exercise of reason has a dual nature. First, it involves the duty to engage in rationality across all aspects of life. However, this duty also entails a paradox of mistrust. Kant encourages to trust in reason, while at the same time requiring us to subject it to rigorous scrutiny in various contexts. In this way, Kant can be seen as the founder of the contemporary university spirit, a place where rationality is both exercised and debated, while also considering its limits. This critical perspective, which examines both the possibilities and limits of reason, allows us to have confidence in dialogue while also distancing ourselves from specific circumstances. This double character has been underlined by the Enlightenment tradition. For example, D'Alembert, the French author, as you know, says we have exercised reason and at the same time ensure that this is possible. In philosophical debates, a central problem with the Foucaultian perspective, or radical historicism, is that it undermines the foundation of normative social orientation. If everything is particular or historical, then no critical point of view is possible. We would be trapped in our circumstances and the language we inherit, unable to reason about them. The epistemic foundation of democracy would not exist. In other words, according to this point of view, Foucault, Rorty, etc., we would be unable to distinguish between quaestio factis, what is the case, and quaestio juris, what ought to be. No? And difference is central to democracy and democratic dialogue, in my view. The plurality of way of life, the different purpose each individual pursues, and extreme cultural diversity are compatible with the idea that we share the same moral duty. This important concept developed by Kant deserves recognition and exploration. Without it, understanding the contribution of Habermas and Rawls or Apple becomes challenging. This raises the question, can we affirm the existence of moral duties in a world divided by radically different beliefs and incommensurable cultures? Kant answered affirmatively, establishing his moral philosophy on the premise that this is indeed possible. The key contribution of the categorical imperative is the idea that we can harmonize human diversity and modern plurality with universal principles. The differences between cultures and society do not conflict with having common guidelines for living together. The notion of universal morality provides a solid foundation for the concept of human rights. However, it conflicts with contemporary multiculturalism, which asserts that morality is relative. In essence, Kant offers a counterpoint to this relative perspective. This counterpoint is compatible with modern pluralism. The Kantian perspective, let me to underline, allow us to reconcile the plurality of life experiences and the diversity of Lebenswelt with the existence of shared moral duties. It opens up the possibility of evaluating our way of life and captivating dialogue, as we are not confined by our circumstances. The third acception is that Kant believed that the human condition lacks a final purpose or telos, that is, a goal whose prosecution allows us to out-order in our life. On the contrary, Kant believes that there is no telos. Instead, we must deliberate and decide without relying on a natural plan to guide the orientation of our lives. It is often assumed that the concept of autonomy is a major contribution of Kant. This is not the case. The concept of autonomy was already seen as a properly human quality in the Pelagian heresy, Pelagio, as you know, and in the great work of San Agustin and Santo Tomás. What is peculiar about Kant's perspective is that he claimed that this autonomy involves making decisions with a specific purpose or goal, while still allowing for moral action and following universal ethical principles. This raises the question of whether Kant is still relevant. It is undeniable that his contributions to modern culture are indispensable. Without him, we would not be able to understand its intricacies. Without his insight, we would be like a mere rope adrift in the vast expanse of time and culture. Yet, it is through his work that we can engage in self-reflection while remaining mindful of the complexities of human diversity and the passage of time. Finally, allow me to now formulate and underline some brief conclusions. Many of the institutions in which we conduct our lives, especially liberal democracy, are built on what we might call Enlightenment foundations. These ideals find in Kant a justification that still guides us today. Let me conclude by emphasizing three aspects for which Kant remains indispensable: citizenship, universalism, and the possibility of rationality guiding our lives. The idea of citizenships rests on the notion of a subject capable of discerning the course of their life and adopting a perspective about others. The difference between a citizen and a consumer is that the former is able to discern concerning common goods, while the latter only has individual preferences. This distinction can be formulated as the Kantian idea that we seek the rational assent of our desires. We do not merely do what we want. We question whether what we want is correct. The entire moral dimension of our lives consists of seeking second-order reasons for our individual or collective conduct. Aristotle observed the same point in his work about the movement of animals. The human agent needs a normative reason for acting. For him, it is not sufficient to have desires. On the other side, the democratic culture rests on the assumption that we share a certain condition from which common needs and goods derive. This idea supported the universalism in politics. Multiculturalism, such as the colonial theory, undermine this idea and replace it with particularism, with a purely identity-driven politics. Kant gave us many reasons for facing particularism and identity politics, which are configuring, in my view, the main danger of democracy today: to transform the political community in a set of islands with no bridge connecting them. Finally, it seems to me that the great challenge of contemporary society is how to reconcile the extreme plurality of life and cultural diversity with the possibility of establishing common criteria to guide our coexistence. These criteria cannot rest on modus vivendi, on a simple de facto agreement. They must derive from reason capable of guiding the will. The idea of practical reason in Kant, I believe, lays the foundation for us to trust that something like this is possible. In summary, 300 years after Kant's birth, I believe there are powerful reasons to continue trusting that his work is indispensable, and to understand that many of the things that underpin democracy find in his work one of the best defenses. Thank you.
So I already have the first two questions, Susan and Ralph. I'll take them in that order.
Sure. Although we might go in different directions, so if you want to go first. I mean, I wanted to ask a question about the application. As Carlos knows, I entirely agree with him. And we met when he kindly invited me in March as rector of the university to spend a week in Chile talking about some of these things. And one of the questions that I kept...
About the woke.
Well, yeah, well, it's because of my book, Left is Not Woke, but the book is also a... some people know it's also an argument for the Enlightenment and questioning of post-colonial theory, Foucault, et cetera, et cetera. The question that I had, though, nothing surprised me in a certain sense more than the way in which woke or decolonial theory, whatever we want to call it, was a problem in Chile. As I understood it, it was even the main problem in getting the constitutional reform through. And why this surprised me was, it seemed to me, I mean, among other things, the tradition of Allende as a real socialist and a real hero was all over the place. It was you know, I got taken to La Moneda and saw all of these really very moving tributes. We don't have a figure like that either in the US or in Germany, or I'm not sure there is one in France. I mean, you know, here's in living memory, someone who was really a brave socialist and a hero. And you would think, or I would think, that having that kind of a model very much in the culture would give some, I mean, I think one of the reasons why, you know, Foucauldianism, all of that takes off is because after 91, nobody wants to talk about socialism. We don't have, there just aren't traditions. The idea is we've given up. We don't have something that we can, and yet Chile does still cherish this particular tradition. So why do you think that this kind of, you know, there's no reason, there's only Stanley Fish, really depressing thought. Why has that caught hold so much in Chile? I did ask a few people and nobody could give me an answer, so perhaps you can.
Well, you are aware that Chile, in the past 3 decades, has experienced a profound process of modernization, with the expansion of consumer in particular. But this process produced a malaise, a profound malaise in the citizenship. And for this reason, there was a constitutional process oriented by left wing, but that left wing is not social democrat. It's radical left, no?
I thought Boric came in wanting to be the new Allende.
Yeah, yeah. And the initiative, which Chile is embarking on two times, no? There was two constitutional process, has failed. The majority of citizenship prefer neoliberalism, modernization, expansion of consumer, etc. No?
Yes, I have several questions. Actually, I don't want to defend Stanley Fish, but he wrote exactly a book answering your question. Is there a text in this class?
Is there text in this class?
Yeah. So it's not that he didn't expect your question. He did. I have many questions, but let me read you something. For reason has no dictatorial authority. Its verdict is always simply the agreement of free citizens, of whom each one must be permitted to express without let or hindrance his objections or even his veto. This is Kant.
Yeah.
Where reason has no dictatorial authority.
Of course.
Then Kant throws actually dethroning reason. The idea that Kant is having a clear idea that reason gives us answers, Kant is all the way down political, because he gives it back to the political arena and says to citizens, go discuss and decide. So reason is not before or above or foundational to the agreement and the convention of the citizen, because there is no higher authority than the citizens. Kant throws us back to the citizen. And that's why most sophisticated Kantian, John Rawls, Habermas, actually interpret Kant as a constructivist, as what that there is we have to talk to each other, and there's nothing. That's why Habermas moves to communicative action. He's inspired by Kant, but he's not Kantian in the sense that he has the authority of reason as you presented.
So not the better arguments, but the majority.
Sorry?
So that's a question tending towards Kant is not supporting the better arguments, but the majority.
He's not supporting a foundational argument
In
for
my
the
view,
authority of reason.
In my view, the fundamental distinction in Kant is between private use of reason and public use of reason. No? And, and the second is the foundation of democracy, and the public sphere, and the possibility to reach consensus.
But then
this is the base of democracy. This is very, very different from the point of view of Stanley Fitch or Derrida or something similar.
I think the way you presented them is not doing fair to them, but that's another story. And I don't think that you need to stand on a universal ground in order to make critique. You can make critique without being universal. Because if you're English and you go to Germany, Germany is not nowhere, it's not universal. You learn things to think about things that's different from the way you do things in England. So the multiplicity of context allow you to go out and inside context.
But you have to distinguish between multiculturalism, de facto, empirical multiculturalism, from de jure multiculturalism. Are different, very different.
You want to come back on that quickly because we still have.
Yeah, I want to go.
It's not the same.
When I'm listening to you, you have still a desire to go outside of the Platonic cave in order to make critique. And my idea of critique is that we can have so many caves. We can just move from one cave to other cave. And while I'm in another cave, I discovered that there are things that in that cave that I don't like. I don't need any sense of the universal in order to make critique, because your presentation was a dichotomy. Either we are particular, either we are universal. Either we can make critique, or everything is relevant. So there is a middle ground that is not all the way down power, or all the way up reason. That's what I was trying to make.
Would you like to?
But the universalism is the foundation of human rights. Or not? Yes.
So there's one question over.
It's obvious.
Anna at the back. Yeah, she was slightly before you.
Without universalism, there is not human rights.
Go on.
I actually do have a comment, not a question. May I still?
Yeah, go on.
I do have a comment, not a question, so I'm sorry, but don't you think that the difference which is missing is a difference between Verstand and Vernunft here, because the reason and understanding, and that would resolve the question about, because I've heard that, I'm sorry, Rahl exactly said that the faculty of reason gives answers, but it doesn't. It only gives us principles which should be subordinated to rules, and that's exactly where politics begins. So if we are clear about these terms, which are quite simply put in, and even in this quote where Kant says about Verstand zu bedienen, nicht Vernunft, because Vernunft only gives us principle to build up a society. That's, I mean, just I'm saying a very heavy discussion, which could be resolved by distinguishing the terms. Sorry, it was a nerdy comment, but just follow the discussion.
No. But I agree with you. Okay, so now Teresa.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was really a thought-provoking presentation, and I think I just can continue with another nerdy comment. I also would have a lot of questions, but I try to, maybe say something provocative myself. So an irritation that I have is, I mean, usually I find myself in rooms where I defend universalism in contexts where people actually are into the decolonial thought. So, and I find myself now in a very weird position that I have no a role that I haven't practiced. An irritation that I had is that, in a way, your reconstruction of the argument seemed to defend either a status quo or a distant past that maybe never was there. And I'm speaking now as a sociologist who is interested in what ideas do in the world. So my thinking is not systematic, but interested in the practices that are engendered by certain ideas, and then the practices themselves that change ideas. And somehow I always get suspicious if a reasoning seems to, especially when it claims to be, for example, universalist, when it somehow seems to just defend what is there, or even wants to bring us back to a past, of which I would ask, has it ever been as good as one might think from your presentation? So for me, in essence, the Enlightenment project is a disruptive project. It made things possible and thinkable that weren't there before. And this is a very personal interest. I don't want to say that everybody has to do it this way, but the continuous relevance for me in Enlightenment thinking and in universalism is that it can continue create disruption. But somehow in the way you told, you told us the story, it's actually doing the opposite. So I don't want to limit, I totally see that Kant is important to thinking citizenship, but I don't want to limit my political imagination to a world that is divided in states, in nation states. And it's also true that he is important to defending democracy, but I mean, I'm happy to live in a place that is organized more democratic than others, but still, as a scholar, I would be interested in thinking beyond this. This is why somehow I feel a certain discomfort with this defensive gesture, and I'm wondering whether in the end it isn't actually an effect of a very particular situatedness, and now this is a very decolonial argument, that like the line between scholarly reasoning and urgent political problems in a political context somehow leads to this particular perspective on the problems.
In general, in my view, the main point in Kant is the separation between theoretical reason on the one hand, what is the case, factual problem, and normative or practical reason. According to Kant, both are separated. No? And it is not possible to derive practical reason for theoretical reason. This gap, in my view, is fundamental in the democratic culture, in our moral dialogue, in our moral conscience. No?
I had a question.
The distance between.
Oh, did you have? Okay.
The distance between the desires, for example, and reasons, and second-order reasons.
Okay, let's hear one more person, and then Susan, and then I have a question.
I'll be quick, I promise. I have a quick comment and a quick question, both of which may seem to be at odds with each other. I was very interested in your emphasis on the language, or perhaps language and identity politics. And I was reminded of something that I think the Yiddish scholar Max Weinreich once defined language to be, which is that language is a dialect with an army. And I think that's a very interesting phrase for the point of time that we're now inhabiting. But also I found myself thinking of the language in which the word reason exists, which is English. And I found myself sifting through the few languages that I know, trying to find a comparable. And at least in Bengali, I can't think of a comparable word. I don't know, there are other people who speak that language in this room. I can think of bibek, which means a conscience, but that's not quite reason. Now, I just want to leave that, I think, there, that comment, that if we cannot find a direct translation of a word, which is not just a word, it's also a register, then how can we begin to conceptualize a world in which there is only one register? But having said that, I find myself completely agreeing with your identification and framing of identity politics. And here, there is a certain universal reason, if I may say, that we can deploy, which essentially only means that if we make an assertion, there has to be an evidence or a set of evidences to back that assertion. And that is something that I find us all very incapable of saying out loud these days, that I'm making a statement, what's my evidence? Immediately somebody will see me as a product of the identities that I hold. not the fact that I'm simply making an assertion and providing evidence for that assertion. And I was wondering if at this moment in time, we can venture to be legible to another human being if we don't share or deploy identity. Is there another way? I mean, Arendt said that if somebody's attacking me as a Jew, I am a Jew, and that's the way that I react to it. And I think we are at a similar moment in time, but also there is a danger of doing that. And I'm interested as to how you perceive the relative danger of this moment as something that we can either overcome or as something that's necessary for us to say anything at all.
In my view, the modern society, the contemporary society, modern society from 2 or 3 centuries ago, are a society with diversity, no? With many, many identities. This is the fact. The political problem is, it is possible to celebrate a contract, a social contract, an agreement with moral foundations to establish institutions in middle of diversity? This is the problem. The answer to the problem is democracy, in my view. And democracy has like main foundations the possibility of rational dialogue, public rational dialogue.
I just wanted to try to mediate between Teresa and Carlos because I think there was a misunderstanding. So I do agree with Carlos that there's a difference between practical and theoretical reason, but Kant always said practical reason was primary. And I certainly agree with Teresa that the great thing about the Enlightenment is that it was disruptive then, and it could still be disruptive now. Yeah. But I understood Carlos's answer to my question about what was happening in Chile. Your remarks about neoliberalism and the democracy, you know, it is democratic and the majority is going for neoliberalism. I took that not to be, I mean, I thought you sounded like you were critical of that development, not simply defending the existing order. I took your remarks to suggest that there's a path that if we followed Kant, we could get to a better place than neoliberal consumerism that's reigning in Chile and elsewhere. Is that right? Did I understand you properly?
Yes.
Which brings me to my set of reflections which connect rather well with that, and it relates to the other side of your equation, which is the assertion of the collective or the identity. Now, to my understanding, the collective is not argued. I mean, if you read somebody like Enrique Dussel or something, he tells you that this is the nation and we want it. He doesn't tell you how or why. This is a very clearly emotive argument. We are because we are. We haven't argued it. We haven't even discussed it amongst ourselves. One of us will tell you that we are. Now, since everybody proceeds in the same way and we don't have an adjudication mechanism, then this is a matter in practice of a consumerist market for identities, which is standing in the political domain for different positions. And again, the problem with structuring demographic opinion in this way is that they're immutable and unchangeable. So you can either have a coalition of identities, and if there are enough of them on one side, you knock out the other ones for a while, or you can have a very fragmented situation, but you seldom get a situation where you can negotiate a difference in anything like a reasonable manner. Why this becomes interesting is that on the one hand, we are asking reason to adjudicate amongst the unreasonable. And on the other hand, we are saying that we can respect the differences. And I don't think we can in the same way, because I think there are certain differences that should not and must not be respected. And the yardstick for that, of course, we will argue about. But I don't think we can resolve it. I think that there are two very incompatible ways of seeing the world. And if we are then faced with the question of, well, but what does the majority want as opposed to what is the reasonable way, then we have no mechanism to resolve it. The reasonable way could actually, through reason, get somewhere. But we haven't the capacity, the institutions, the platforms to reason anymore. Now, this is not, I don't think this is a perspective I'm bringing from a completely different set of political context, but I think by and large we have the same problem, that we assert this is us, this is our sphere. How many people we forcibly include in our us, imprison and terrorize or exclude by including, is a very difficult question to answer, because the collectives are not questioned. At least if you approach it from a decolonial perspective, you're not questioning the collective, you're asserting it. But in your view, there is a de facto multiculturalism, which is a softer multiculturalism. It accepts that there are differences, but there are ways around treating the differences as immutable and perfect.
Yeah. Multiculturalism de facto is perfectly compatible with democracy, of course. The problem is multiculturalism de jure and politics of identity. No? Yeah.
Solves the notion of citizenship.
Yes.
Or roads it.
Yes.
It's in tension with it, particularly in a country where you have a minority, Palestinians and Israel. So, should you teach Arabic in Arabic school? Is that politics of identity? Is the idea of citizenship means that we all should study Hebrew? Is Hebrew universal? Why the majority is universal? The color of the majority is always invisible, appears as universal.
No, but that's a very old and I think a superseded set of questions. I think nobody has forever argued that.
He would think differently. He would think that we should all study one language.
Do you admit to what he is now trying to attribute to you?
The problem is,
Could I?
the problem is there exists universal principles or not. This is the problem.